The massive chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls gleaming with alien metals that caught and bent light in impossible ways. Commander Jake Harrison sat at the small human table, watching hundreds of alien delegates argue over humanity's fate as if humans weren't even present. The air smelled of ozone and something sweet that reminded him of rotting fruit. Dr. Lisa Grant shuffled through her papers beside him, her hands steady despite 3 years of this same humiliating routine. She had prepared another set of reasonable proposals, another attempt to find middle ground between what humanity needed and what the galaxy was willing to give. Jake knew it would fail before she even started speaking. The Galactic Council had been meeting for over 8 centuries, and humans had only been invited to join these talks 3 years ago. It was supposed to be an honor, a sign that humanity had finally earned respect among the stars. Jake had believed that once, back when he still thought the galaxy operated on principles of fairness and mutual benefit. High Counselor Zephyrim floated above the central podium, his crystalline body pulsing with soft blue light. The ancient being had lived for thousands of years and treated every younger species like children who needed constant guidance. His voice echoed through the chamber with the weight of absolute authority. We shall now hear from the human delegation. Regarding the Corvani territorial dispute, Zephyrim announced, his tone suggesting this was merely a formality. Lisa stood and walked to the speaking platform, her simple blue uniform stark against the elaborate robes and biomechanical suits worn by other delegates. She activated the holographic display and began presenting humanity's position with calm professionalism. Honored council members, humanity proposes a compromise regarding the outer colony worlds. We maintain administrative control over established settlements while agreeing to joint patrols of disputed space routes. This arrangement would preserve both human sovereignty and Corvani security interests. Ambassador Vexstar, the Saurian delegate, interrupted before Lisa could continue. His reptilian features twisted into what humans had learned was an expression of contempt. The humans continued to misunderstand their position in galactic affairs. These worlds were claimed by the Corvani Empire centuries before your species. Achieved spaceflight, you have no right to call them colonies. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jake watched delegates from dozens of species nod their approval of Vexstar's words. These same beings had welcomed humanity's participation in galactic trade, had eagerly purchased human innovations and technologies, but they refused to acknowledge human rights to the worlds their people had settled and developed. Lisa maintained her composure despite the insult. Ambassador Vexstar, these settlements were established on uninhabited worlds. Human colonists have lived there for over 50 years, building cities and infrastructure. Surely the Council recognizes the principle of actual occupation over historical claims. Historical claims, Vexstar repeated with a hissing laugh. You speak of 50 years as if it matters when measured against the 1,000-year reign of the Corvani. Your people are newcomers who should be grateful for any territory the galaxy chooses to grant you. The chamber filled with clicking, chirping, and buzzing sounds as various species expressed their agreement in their native languages. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he watched beings who had never set foot on a human world casually discuss giving those worlds away to satisfy an empire that had done nothing with them for centuries. Counselor Vexani, whose insectoid features were hidden behind a breathing apparatus, spoke in her mechanical voice. Perhaps the humans need reminder of their proper place in galactic hierarchy. They are recent arrivals who have contributed little to galactic civilization beyond basic innovations and raw materials. Jake nearly stood at that moment. Basic innovations. Humanity had revolutionized galactic manufacturing, provided solutions to energy crises that had plagued multiple worlds, and offered medical breakthroughs that had saved millions of alien lives. But to these delegates, humans were still primitives. who should be grateful for any scraps thrown their way. Lisa tried again, her voice remaining level despite the mounting hostility. The human colonies in question support over 2 million people. These are established communities with their own cultures and economies. We cannot simply abandon them to satisfy territorial claims based on ancient star charts. Cannot or will. Not, Vextar asked with obvious mockery. Your species seems remarkably stubborn for one so dependent on galactic goodwill. Perhaps you have forgotten that human space exists only because we allow it. High Councilor Zephyrim pulsed brighter, drawing attention back to himself. The Saurian delegate raises valid concerns about human attitude toward established galactic order. Young species often struggle to understand their proper role in cosmic civilization. Perhaps what humanity needs is a period of guidance to help them learn appropriate behavior. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Guidance. The same word other species used when they wanted to strip away independence and turn free worlds into puppet states. He had seen what galactic guidance looked like on the rim worlds where alien administrators made decisions for populations they neither understood nor cared about. The crystalline being continued speaking, his ancient voice carrying the weight. O assumed wisdom. I propose that human colonies be placed under Corvani administrative oversight, while human representatives undergo extensive education in galactic protocols. This arrangement would benefit all parties by ensuring stability while humans learn their proper place in our civilization. The chamber erupted in approval. Delegates from dozens of species voiced their support for a plan that would effectively end human independence in space. Jake watched Lisa's shoulders sag slightly as she realized that 3 years of patient diplomacy had led to this moment, where the galaxy's leadership casually voted to destroy everything humanity had built among the stars. Lisa made one final attempt. Honored Consul, humanity has always sought peaceful coexistence with our galactic neighbors. We have contributed to galactic prosperity and stability. We ask only for the same respect and sovereignty granted to other spacefaring civilizations. Respect must be earned, Vextar replied, his reptilian eyes glittering with satisfaction. And sovereignty is a privilege granted to species mature enough to exercise it responsibly. Perhaps in a few centuries, when humans have learned proper behavior, such considerations might be appropriate. Jake Harrison stood slowly from his chair. The conversation around him faded as he looked out over the vast chamber filled with beings who had just voted to enslave his species while pretending it was for humanity's own good. 3 years of listening to condescension and insults. 3 years of watching his people's achievements dismissed and their rights ignored. 3 years of pretending that negotiation was possible with creatures who saw humans as useful animals rather than equals. The chamber gradually fell silent as delegates noticed the human commander standing motionless beside his table. Jake looked up at High Councilor Zephyrim, then slowly turned his gaze across the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. When he finally spoke, his voice carried clearly through the crystal amphitheater. Humanity withdraws from these negotiations, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. In 800 years of galactic council meetings, no species had ever simply walked away from the table. Delegates stared in shock as Jake gathered his materials with calm deliberation. Lisa looked at him with surprise, but after a moment's hesitation, she began collecting her own papers and data pads. As the human delegation moved toward the chamber exit, Vextar recovered from his shock enough to call out mockingly, "Running away, humans. How predictable. Return when you are ready to accept the galaxy's wisdom and submit to proper guidance." Jake paused at the massive doorway and turned back to face the chamber. Every alien eye was fixed on him, waiting to see how the primitive human would respond to such obvious mockery. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the vast space. we're not running. We're done pretending you have anything we need." The news traveled across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every major world and station. Within hours of humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council chambers, alien leaders from hundreds of species were discussing what they saw as an unprecedented act of defiance by a primitive civilization that Admiral Kate Murphy stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching Earth grow larger in the viewscreen as her fleet returned home. The recall order had reached them just 6 hours after Commander Harrison's declaration, pulling every human vessel back from alien space with immediate effect. She had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 20 years, but she had never seen a mobilization order quite like this one, not Captain. Ben Clark piloted his reconnaissance ship Falcon through the outer rim of human space, his sensors recording everything as alien patrol ships suddenly appeared along borders that had been peaceful for decades. The Saurians had moved 3 battle groups to human territory within 12 hours of the failed negotiations. Other species were repositioning their fleets as well, though whether for defense or intimidation remained unclear. On Nexus Prime, Councilor Vexani addressed an emergency session of remaining delegates. Her mechanical voice carried certainty as she explained humanity's expected behavior to worried alien representatives. The humans will return within 2 weeks, perhaps 3 at most. Their economy depends entirely on galactic trade routes and exotic materials they cannot produce themselves. Without our guidance and support, their colonies will face immediate shortages of essential resources. Ambassador Vextar nodded his scaled head in agreement. The human gesture was emotional, rather than strategic. Their species has demonstrated impulsive behavior before, but they are not foolish enough to maintain this isolation when reality sets in. We must simply wait for them to recognize their mistake and request readmission to negotiations under more reasonable terms. High Counselor Zipharim pulsed with calm blue light as he addressed the chamber. The Galactic Council has maintained order for 8 centuries by helping younger species understand their proper roles in cosmic civilization. Humanity will learn this lesson as others have before them. Their brief rebellion will serve as education for both themselves and any other species that might consider such foolishness. But as days passed, something unexpected began happening across human space. Instead of the predicted chaos and desperate appeals for help, human colonies were displaying remarkable organization and efficiency. General Alex Rivera activated Protocol Independence, a contingency plan that most alien intelligence services had never heard of because humans had developed it in complete secrecy during 3 years of increasingly hostile negotiations. Underground factories emerged from hidden locations beneath major population centers. Research facilities that alien observers had dismissed as minor laboratories revealed themselves as advanced development centers working on technologies that shouldn't have been possible for such a young civilization. Captain Clark's reconnaissance. Flights showed massive construction projects beginning simultaneously across dozens of human worlds. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when Corvani trade ships arrived at human ports, expecting to conduct normal business, only to find the stations completely empty. Human merchants had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but automated messages, politely declining all future trade arrangements. The Corvani captains waited for days, assuming this was some kind of negotiating tactic, but no humans ever. APEARED Dr. Nick Chun supervised the activation of manufacturing centers that had been built secretly over the past 3 years. While alien delegates had been lecturing humans about their dependence on galactic technology, human engineers had been quietly developing alternatives to everything they imported. The exotic materials that aliens claimed were impossible for humans to produce were flowing from automated plants that used processes no other species had ever imagined. Within 2 weeks of the withdrawal, Alien economic analysts began noticing disturbing trends. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for decades were showing stress fractures as human goods disappeared from markets. Technologies that humans had provided were suddenly unavailable, forcing other species to seek more expensive alternatives, or simply do without. Counselor Vexani received reports from her home world that confused and alarmed her. Manufacturing centers were running at reduced capacity because they could no longer obtain certain components that humans had supplied. Medical facilities were rationing treatments that depended on human pharmaceutical innovations. Even basic consumer goods were becoming scarce as supply chains that included human production fell apart. Captain Amy Foster commanded the exploration vessel Liberty as it led the first wave of human expansion beyond their previous borders. Her mission was to claim uninhabited systems that other species had ignored or declared unsuitable for colonization. What she found surprised even human planners, as worlds that aliens considered worthless proved to be rich in resources that human technology could easily extract and utilize. The speed of human expansion shocked galactic observers who had assumed that humanity's small fleet was barely capable of maintaining existing colonies. New human settlements appeared in star systems that had been empty the week before, complete with defensive installations and mining operations that seemed to have been constructed impossibly quickly. War Master Kaltak of the aggressive Drakmari decided that humanity's apparent expansion was a threat that needed immediate response. His species had built their reputation on decisive military action, and he convinced his government that a quick strike against human outer colonies would demonstrate humanity's weakness while securing valuable territory for Drakmari expansion. Drakmari attack fleet consisted of 37 heavy warships equipped with the latest galactic military technology. Kaltak had studied human defensive capabilities during the peace negotiations and concluded that their small patrol ships and orbital platforms would be easily overwhelmed by superior firepower and numbers. Fleet Admiral Ryan Brooks received warning of the approaching Drakmari fleet through sensor networks that extended far beyond what aliens believed human technology could achieve. He had been expecting something like this, knowing that aggressive species would interpret humanity's withdrawal as weakness rather than strength. His response was swift, precise, and absolutely devastating. The Drakmari war fleet entered the outer human system expecting to find frightened colonists and minimal resistance. Instead, they encountered defensive installations that appeared out of nowhere, armed with weapons that no galactic military had ever seen before. The engagement lasted exactly 14 minutes before the last Drakmari ship was either destroyed or forced to retreat with critical damage. Kaltak survived the battle but found himself facing questions from his own government that he couldn't answer. Human weapons had penetrated Drakmari shields like they didn't exist, and human defensive systems had tracked and targeted his ships with impossible accuracy. Most disturbing of all, the humans had achieved this victory without deploying a single major warship, using only automated platforms and small patrol craft. The news of Drakmari defeat sent shock waves through the Galactic Council. Species that had dismissed human military capabilities were suddenly forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity's strength. Admiral Brooks followed up his defensive victory with surgical strikes against Drakmari military installations, demonstrating that human forces could project power far beyond their own territory. Weeks of humanity's withdrawal from negotiations, the galactic balance of power had shifted in ways that no one had predicted. Human space was expanding rapidly, while alien economies struggled with supply chain disruptions. Military analysts were reporting that human defensive capabilities far exceeded previous estimates, and intelligence services were admitting they had almost no reliable information about humanity's true industrial and technological capacity. Counselor Vexani faced angry delegates from her own species as economic problems mounted. The insectoid civilization had grown dependent on human innovations without realizing it, and their attempts to find replacement sources for essential technologies were failing badly. Other species were reporting similar problems as they discovered how much of their prosperity had quietly come to depend on human contributions. High CouncilHFY called for patience and calm, but his crystalline form was pulsing with colors that other delegates recognized as signs of uncertainty. The ancient being had seen younger species challenge galactic order before, but none had ever demonstrated the combination of independence, capability, and apparent indifference to galactic approval that humanity was displaying. Ambassador Vex Tar received intelligence reports that his government demanded he explain, but he found himself unable to provide satisfactory answers. Human expansion was accelerating rather than slowing. Human military strength was far greater than anyone had suspected, and most troubling of all, humans seemed completely unconcerned about the consequences of defying galactic authority. Galaxy was beginning to realize that they had misunderstood humanity completely. 6 months had passed since humanity's dramatic withdrawal from the Galactic Council, and the changes across human space were becoming impossible to ignore. What had once been a modest collection of frontier colonies scattered across 37 star systems had grown into a sprawling civilization that now controlled over 90 systems, with new settlements appearing every week in regions that other species had written off as worthless or impossible to inhabit. Dr. Nick Chun stood in the observation deck of Research Station Prometheus, watching massive construction ships assemble. Another deep space facility in the void between stars. The station would serve as both a scientific outpost and a strategic waypoint for human expansion into the galaxy's outer rim, where ancient species rarely ventured and younger civilizations feared to explore. The technologies emerging from human research centers were advancing at a pace that would have seemed impossible during the years of galactic oversight. Without alien advisors constantly explaining why certain innovations were too dangerous or inappropriate for a young species, human scientists had made breakthrough after breakthrough in fields ranging from exotic matter manipulation to dimensional engineering. Captain Amy Foster piloted her exploration vessel, Liberty, through a nebula that Galactic Council surveys had declared uninhabitable, her sensors detecting rich deposits of rare elements that could only be harvested using uniquely human extraction methods. Her crew had established 17 new outposts in the past month alone, each one representing territory that other species had never even attempted to claim. The speed of human expansion was creating panic in alien intelligence services that were struggling to track and understand what humanity was actually doing. Traditional surveillance methods were failing completely as human ships used technologies that operated outside conventional detection parameters, and human settlements were being built in locations that alien doctrine considered strategically impossible to defend or economically worthless to develop. War Master Koltak had recovered from his devastating defeat 6 months earlier, but the experience had changed him in ways that his own people found disturbing. The proud Drakmari warrior spent his time studying recordings of the battle that had destroyed most of his fleet, trying to understand weapons and tactics that seemed to violate everything he knew about galactic military science. The human defensive systems had not just defeated his ships, they had made the encounter look effortless. Automated platforms had emerged from what appeared to be empty space, engaged his entire battle fleet with perfect coordination, and then disappeared back into concealment before Drakmari reinforcements could arrive. His military analysts could not explain how humans had achieved such capabilities without anyone noticing during 3 years of supposedly open diplomatic relations. Koltak's defeat had broader consequences than anyone initially realized. Other aggressive species that had been considering their own tests of human strength reconsidered their plans after learning what had happened to the Drakmari fleet. The message was clear enough that even the most militant alien leaders could understand it. Humanity was not the weak prey they had appeared to be during the peace negotiations. Fleet Admiral Ryan Brooks coordinated the largest military exercise in human history from his command center on Earth, watching as defensive networks that spanned dozens of star systems conducted synchronized operations. The exercise was partly for training purposes, but it also served as a demonstration for any alien observers who might be monitoring human space with whatever surveillance capabilities they still possessed. The demonstration revealed military infrastructure that simply should not have existed. Human defensive installations were operating in star systems that had been empty wilderness just months before, connected by communication networks that transmitted information faster than any known galactic technology should have allowed, and equipped with weapon systems that alien military experts could not identify or understand. But the most disturbing aspect of human expansion, from the alien perspective, was not its speed or scope, but its apparent sustainability. Galactic economists had confidently predicted that humanity would face immediate resource shortages and economic collapse once they lost access to established trade networks. But exactly the opposite was happening. Human colonies were not just surviving without alien support. They were thriving in ways that defied galactic economic models. Manufacturing centers were producing goods at rates that should have required much larger populations and more advanced infrastructure. Mining operations were extracting resources from worlds that alien surveys had declared barren or technically impossible to develop. Commander Paul Mitchell supervised intelligence operations from a facility that officially did not exist, analyzing data gathered by human agents who had spent years embedded within alien governments and organizations. The intelligence revealed the true extent of the conspiracy that had shaped 3 years of failed peace negotiations. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Multiple alien species had collaborated to keep humanity weak and dependent through carefully orchestrated diplomatic pressure and economic manipulation. They had planned to gradually absorb human colonies into their own territories, while using human populations as a controlled labor force for dangerous or unpleasant work that their own citizens preferred to avoid. The conspiracy had involved not just the obviously hostile species, like the Saurians and Drakmari, but also supposedly friendly civilizations that had presented themselves as mentors and allies, while secretly working to undermine human independence. Trade agreements had been structured to create dependencies that would make resistance impossible, and technological exchanges had been designed to keep humans reliant on alien expertise for essential systems. Most revealing of all was the discovery that alien intelligence services had spent years trying to infiltrate and understand human society, only to fail completely because they had underestimated human adaptability and creativity. Their agents had been identified and fed false information from the very beginning, while human observers had penetrated deep into alien power structures without being detected. President Maria Santos received daily briefings on these intelligence discoveries from her secure office in the rebuilt Capitol complex on Earth. Each report confirmed what human leaders had suspected for years. The galaxy operated on principles of domination and exploitation, rather than the mutual cooperation and respect that aliens publicly claimed to value. The decision to release this intelligence to the galactic community was not made lightly, but President Santos concluded that the truth needed to be revealed before alien propaganda could shape the narrative of humanity's withdrawal. The evidence was transmitted simultaneously to news organizations, government offices, and public communication networks across hundreds of worlds. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had participated in the conspiracy found themselves facing internal uprisings as their own populations learned how their governments had plotted to enslave another civilization. Alien leaders who had built their reputations on principles of justice and equality were exposed as hypocrites who supported slavery as long as it benefited their own people. The Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in centuries, as member species either withdrew in disgust or demanded immediate reforms to prevent such conspiracies in the future. High Councilor Zephyrim's authority collapsed overnight as delegates realized that the ancient crystalline being had either been complicit in the conspiracy or so incompetent that he had failed to notice it happening under his direct supervision. Sage Velthor, one of the oldest and most respected beings in known space, made an unprecedented decision to leave his homeworld and seek a personal meeting with human leadership. The ancient ethereal had lived for over 10,000 years and had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of galactic civilizations. But he had never seen anything quite like humanity's emergence as a major power. The journey to human space took Velthor through regions that had been transformed beyond recognition in just 6 months. Where once there had been empty systems with perhaps a single human outpost, he now found thriving colonies connected by shipping lanes, busy with traffic moving goods and people between dozens of worlds. What impressed Velthor most was not the scale of human expansion, but its character. Unlike other species that had risen to galactic prominence through conquest and domination, humans seemed to be building something genuinely different. Their colonies were not extractive operations designed to ship resources back to a central homeworld, but genuine communities where people were creating new ways of life adapted to local conditions. The meeting between Velthor and President Santos took place in a simple conference room, rather than the elaborate ceremonial spaces that other species used for diplomatic encounters. The ancient ethereal found this informality both refreshing and revealing, as it suggested that humans were more interested in substance than symbolic displays of power. During their conversation, Velthor began to understand what made humanity different from other galactic civilizations. Humans did not see expansion as conquest or diplomacy as domination, but as opportunities to create new possibilities and solve interesting problems. 1 year after humanity's dramatic withdrawal from galactic politics, the transformation of known space was complete enough that even the most stubborn alien leaders could no longer deny what had happened. President Maria Santos stood before a holographic display showing the current state of human territory, watching as another dozen systems changed from disputed to fully controlled status in real time. The map told a story that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier. Human space now encompassed over 200 star systems, including vast regions that other species had never bothered to explore because they considered them worthless or too dangerous to settle. Every one of those systems was not just claimed, but actively developed, with colonies that were already contributing to an economy that had grown beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen from such a young civilization. Commander Paul Mitchell presented his final intelligence report to the President and her senior advisors, summarizing what human agents had learned about the conspiracy that had shaped 3 years of failed negotiations. The evidence was so comprehensive and damning that several alien governments had already collapsed under the weight of public outrage when their own citizens learned how they had been manipulated into supporting what amounted to a plan for organized slavery. The Corvani Empire was facing the worst crisis in its 1,000-year history as colony worlds that had been promised. Human labor and resources found themselves dealing with economic collapse instead. Internal rebellions were spreading across Corvani space as local populations demanded explanations for policies that had led their government to make enemies of the most dynamic and innovative species the galaxy had encountered in centuries. The Saurian Confederation was dealing with similar problems as Ambassador Vexstar found himself facing charges of incompetence and corruption from his own people. The reptilian diplomat, who had spent 3 years insulting and dismissing human capabilities, was now being blamed for creating a situation where his species had lost access to technologies and trade, relationships that their economy had quietly grown to depend upon. But the collapse of alien power structures was only part of the story that President Santos was watching unfold across the galaxy. The more important development was the emergence of new relationships between species that had been oppressed or marginalized by the old galactic order, and were now finding opportunities to work directly with humanity on terms of genuine equality. Director Sam Wright supervised the most ambitious colonization program in galactic history from his headquarters on New Terra, a world that had been transformed from barren rock to thriving metropolis in less than 8 months. His teams were not just establishing new settlements, but creating entire civilizations adapted to environments that other species could not even survive in, let alone develop into productive colonies. The secret to human success was becoming clear. To observers who took the time to study what humanity was actually doing, rather than simply reacting to their rapid expansion. Humans did not try to impose standard solutions on every world they colonized, but instead developed unique approaches tailored to local conditions and opportunities. Where other species saw worthless ice worlds, humans built geothermal cities that used planetary heat to power advanced manufacturing centers. Where aliens found only poisonous gas giants, human engineers created orbital habitats that harvested rare atmospheric compounds for use in technologies that no one else had ever imagined. Where galactic surveys identified only barren asteroid fields, human miners found resources that could be extracted using methods that turned worthless rock into valuable materials. Admiral Tony Parker commanded the largest fleet in human history. As it conducted operations across the outer rim of explored space, but his mission was not conquest in any traditional sense. Instead of seeking to dominate other species or claim territory through force, human expansion was focused on development and cooperation with anyone willing to engage on terms of mutual respect. The results were unprecedented in galactic history. Species that had been ignored or exploited by major powers for centuries were finding themselves welcomed as equal partners in human development projects. Worlds that had been written off as too primitive or poor to matter were discovering that their unique perspectives and capabilities were valuable assets in the new civilization that humanity was building. Captain Lisa Stone commanded the flagship Defiance as it escorted a diplomatic mission to the Zephyrian homeworld, where an ancient aquatic species had spent centuries being treated as barely civilized by air-breathing aliens who could not understand their underwater cities. The Zephyrians possessed knowledge of deep ocean engineering that was revolutionizing human underwater colonies, while human technology was helping them expand their civilization to worlds that had previously been impossible for them to develop. These partnerships were creating a new model for galactic civilization that threatened everything the old order had been built upon. Instead of hierarchical relationships where powerful species dominated weaker ones, humanity was demonstrating that cooperation between equals could produce results that benefited everyone involved. The Galactic Council had effectively ceased to function as a governing body for much of known space. High Counselor Zephyrium's authority had been so thoroughly discredited by the intelligence revelations that many species no longer recognized his right to speak for galactic civilization. Emergency sessions were being called constantly as member species either demanded massive reforms or announced their withdrawal from an organization they now saw as corrupt and illegitimate. Sage Velther returned from his visit to human space, carrying a message that would reshape how the galaxy understood its own future. The ancient ethereal had spent weeks traveling through human territory, observing their colonies and speaking with their leaders, and what he had learned convinced him that the old galactic order was not just ending, but needed to end. The message Velther delivered to the emergency council session was simple but revolutionary. Humanity had proven that galactic civilization could operate on principles of genuine equality and mutual benefit rather than domination and exploitation. Any species that wanted to participate in the new order that was emerging would need to abandon the hierarchical thinking that had shaped galactic politics for centuries. The reaction to Velther's message split the remaining council members into two clear factions. Progressive species that had always been uncomfortable with the old system saw an opportunity to create something better, while conservative powers that had benefited from traditional hierarchies viewed humanity's success as a threat that needed to be contained or destroyed. Elder Kixmara of the Centauri Federation emerged as the leader of the progressive faction, announcing that her people would work to establish a new galactic assembly based on the principles that humanity had demonstrated. The announcement triggered a cascade of similar declarations, as dozens of species abandoned the old council to join what was being called the Galactic Assembly of Free Worlds. War Master Koltak faced a choice that would determine not just his own future, but the fate of his entire species. The Drakmari military leader had spent months studying the defeat of his fleet and had come to understand that humanity's strength came not from superior weapons alone, but from a completely different approach to conflict and cooperation. The Drakmari had built their civilization on the principle that strength meant the ability to dominate others through force, but humanity had demonstrated strength through the ability to adapt, create, and unite others in common cause. Koltak's own warriors were beginning to question whether their traditional values were actually making them weaker rather than stronger. The decision Koltak faced was whether to lead his people in a futile attempt to restore the old order through violence, or to swallow his pride and seek to learn from the species that had humiliated his forces so completely. The choice would determine whether the Drakmari joined the new galactic civilization as equals or found themselves increasingly isolated as the galaxy moved beyond the principles that had once made them feared. President Santis authorized the release of advanced human technologies to species that joined the new assembly, but only under conditions that ensured they would be used for development and cooperation rather than domination and conquest. The offer represented both an opportunity and a test, as it would reveal which alien civilizations were genuinely committed to change and which were simply looking for new ways to gain advantage over their neighbors. The galaxy was dividing into two distinct groups: those who embraced the new model of cooperation and equality that humanity represented, and those who clung to the old systems of hierarchy and domination that had shaped galactic politics for millennia. The outcome of this division would determine whether the future belonged to civilizations that could adapt and grow together, or to those that would fight to preserve privileges and power structures that the universe was rapidly making obsolete. As President Santos prepared for the challenges ahead, she knew that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not conquered their enemies or forced other species to submit to human authority. 2 years had passed since humanity's dramatic exit from the old Galactic Council, and the transformation of known space was complete in ways that no one could have predicted. Ambassador Carl Johnson stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance. As it approached the new assembly station, a massive structure built in neutral space with a Galactic Assembly of Free Worlds would hold its founding session. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, designed and built by 17 different species working together, using principles that humanity had demonstrated throughout their expansion. Unlike the crystal cathedral of the old council chambers that had been designed to intimidate and inspire awe, Assembly Station was built for function and accessibility, with spaces that could accommodate the environmental needs of every known form of intelligent life. Captain Lisa Stone guided her ship through the bustling traffic around the station, watching as vessels from across the galaxy arrived to participate in what historians were already calling the most important diplomatic gathering in recorded history. The ships represented not just different species, but different philosophies about how galactic civilization should operate. Elder Kixmara of the Centauri Federation had worked tirelessly to organize the new assembly, bringing together species that had never cooperated before under principles of genuine equality and mutual respect. Her efforts had created something unprecedented, a galactic government based on shared values, rather than military dominance or economic exploitation. The contrast with the old system was visible everywhere Johnson looked as he prepared to represent humanity at the founding session. Where the original Galactic Council had been dominated by ancient species that treated younger civilizations as children or servants, the new assembly included representatives from civilizations of every age and development level, all participating. As equals, Director Sam Wright sent his final report on human colonial expansion from New Terra, documenting achievements that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Human space now encompassed over 400 star systems, each one developed according to local conditions and opportunities rather than standardized templates imposed from central authority. The success of human colonization had inspired other species to adopt similar approaches, leading to a renaissance of development across the galaxy as civilizations discovered they could thrive by adapting to local conditions rather than trying to force those conditions to match preconceived expectations. War Master Koltak arrived at Assembly Station aboard a Drakmari vessel that carried symbols of peace rather than weapons of war. His journey from proud military commander to advocate for cooperation had been difficult and humbling, but it had also shown his people a path toward strength that did not depend on dominating others. Drakmari delegation included not just military leaders, but scientists, engineers, and philosophers who had spent months studying human methods and adapting them to Drakmari culture. They had discovered that their traditional emphasis on individual strength could be channeled into collective achievement rather than destructive competition. President Maria Santos transmitted her opening address to the Assembly from Earth, choosing to participate remotely rather than make a grand entrance that might overshadow the historic nature of the gathering. Her message was simple but powerful. Humanity was honored to participate in building something new, but they had no desire to lead or control what other species chose to create together. The presidential address established the tone for everything that followed. Unlike the old council, where ancient species had claimed authority over younger ones, the new assembly operated on principles of shared responsibility and collective decision-making. No single species or group could impose their will on others, but every voice would be heard and considered in reaching consensus. Ambassador Johnson took his place in the assembly chamber alongside representatives from over 200 different civilizations, many of which had never been invited to participate in galactic governance under the old system. The diversity was staggering, with beings of every conceivable form and origin working together to establish institutions that could serve the needs of all. Sage Velthur delivered the opening ceremony address, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of experience as he spoke about the transformation he had witnessed. The elderly ethereal described humanity's emergence not as conquest or revolution, but as evolution, showing the galaxy what was possible when civilizations chose cooperation over domination. The first major decision facing the new assembly was how to handle the species and institutions that had supported the old system of galactic hierarchy. Some delegates wanted punishment for those who had participated in the conspiracy to enslave humanity, while others argued for forgiveness and inclusion for anyone willing to embrace the new principles. Johnson spoke for humanity during this debate, advocating for a policy of conditional inclusion that would welcome former enemies, while ensuring they could not use their participation to undermine the values the assembly was built upon. His speech emphasized that the goal was not revenge, but the creation of something better than what had existed before. The Corvani Empire sent a delegation led by a young diplomat named Velkara, who had replaced the discredited leadership that had orchestrated the failed attempt to dominate humanity. She offered formal apologies for her government's actions and requested membership in the new assembly under whatever conditions the other species deemed appropriate. The response to the Corvani request became a test case for how the new system would handle former adversaries. After extensive debate, the Assembly agreed to accept Quavani membership with a probationary period during which their actions would be monitored to ensure genuine commitment to cooperative principles. Even the Saurian Confederation eventually sent representatives, though Ambassador Vextar had been replaced by a younger diplomat who understood that his species' survival depended on adapting to the new galactic order. The Saurians faced the difficult task of rebuilding their reputation after years of aggressive hostility toward other species. The transformation of galactic civilization was not limited to politics and diplomacy. Captain Amy Foster reported from the Outer Rim, where human exploration teams were working with scientists from dozens of species to map regions of space that had never been systematically studied. Their discoveries were revolutionizing understanding of cosmic phenomena and revealing opportunities for development that no single species could have achieved alone. The cooperative research programs emerging from these joint expeditions were producing technological breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. Species that had guarded their knowledge jealously for centuries were discovering that sharing information and methods with others led to advances that benefited everyone involved. Dr. Nick Chun coordinated the largest scientific collaboration in galactic history from research stations scattered across human space. His teams included beings from over 50 different species, all working together on projects that range from exotic matter manipulation to the development of technologies that could support life in previously impossible environments. The success of these collaborative efforts was changing how the galaxy thought about knowledge and innovation. Instead of viewing scientific advancement as a competitive advantage to be hoarded, species were learning that shared research produced results that no one could achieve in isolation. Fleet Admiral Ryan Brooks commanded defensive operations that protected not just human territory, but the shipping lanes and trade routes that connected all the civilizations participating in the new galactic order. His forces worked alongside military units from allied species to ensure that the cooperative networks emerging across the galaxy could operate without fear of attack from hostile groups. His security arrangements were as revolutionary as everything else about the new system. Instead of each species maintaining separate military forces that viewed others as potential threats, the Assembly was developing integrated defense networks based on mutual protection and shared responsibility. Paul Mitchell's intelligence services had evolved from protecting human interests to monitoring threats against the entire galactic community. His agents worked to identify and counter efforts by extremist groups that wanted to restore the old hierarchical system through violence or sabotage. The final session of the founding Assembly addressed the question that had shaped 2 years of transformation. What would the new galactic order be called, and how would it operate on a permanent basis? After extensive debate, the delegates agreed to establish the United Galactic Commonwealth, with rotating leadership and decision-making, structures that ensured no single species or faction could dominate the others. Ambassador Johnson delivered humanity's closing statement to the Assembly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them from humiliating peace negotiations to equal partnership in galactic governance. He spoke about the lessons learned and the challenges that lay ahead, but his primary message was one of hope and determination. The galaxy had learned that civilization did not require domination. That strength came from cooperation rather than conquest.